So this is the letter Het, and we discussed last week a little bit that the letter Het is the one letter with a very rasping, grating, obnoxious sound. It's like, so it's not Chet, even though it's often spelled with a CH, it's actually Het. So I'm going to work on the board here a little bit, Mark, if you want to gear the camera over. I'm going to do a little bit of a review. Last week we talked about the use of the dictionary. The week before that was the letter Zion, the 7th letter. This is the letter Het, which is the 8th letter. There is a dictionary that I have that spelled the letter Het as an English equivalent with an X with a line through it. Because the only way that people usually do it is with a CH, but then you spell it like Chet or Chanukah. So I write it with a C and an X, a lowercase x. So the word Samek this letter would be the Het sound. In Paleo it's written like that. The modern letter is written like that. It's the 8th letter. And 7 is a basic completion to Zion. So the 7th letter, which is the Zion, you can almost see a 7 shape there. It's like an axe. 8 refers to, well, they say 7 is a completion or a full number, a perfect number. It's called the perfect number. That's a whole other mysticism about that, you might say. But the 8 is called new beginning. Well, the interesting thing about this is an Arabic number, the way we write these numbers with the English writing, but this in mathematics is the infinity symbol, which is basically the number 8 turned on its side. So you could look at 8 as saying, well, if we have a model here of observing 7 days of creation, and the 7th day was Shabbat, the day of rest, in which case all the works of the Creator, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yahweh, were completed after 6 days, and then he rested the 7th, that created, as it were, a certain envelope. Outside the envelope, 8 would be, well, that's like the first day of the following week. You start counting the series of 7s again. If you say, well, 7 is a completion of a package, then some people say, well, that's a model for determining that 7,000 years are ordained for planet Earth. That's where they come up with this. 8 then would mean going into eternity, outside the envelope. And the interesting thing that the number 8 is the infinity, eternity symbol, and it lines up with the Het. Het literally means a fence. So again, if you look in the Rid dictionary, at the beginning, the first page of each letter, it'll tell you something about the letter's design and what it means. So it'll tell you that the ancient form of Het was a fence. And so you could say, well, say you had a picket fence, and then you have a top rail, and say you have the bottom where you put the fabric of the fence in between, whether it's chain link or pickets, but this general shape of the fence, or whether you turn it this way and have one line, which is easier to draw than instead of 2 lines. All these, if you look at Frank Seekins and Jeff Benner and other people that study Paleo-Hebrew, all these are actually ancient forms of the letter Het. I write it this way. That was one of the forms that was actually used. I'll show you why. The letter Het represents a fence, but it's tied to something else. In the sky, there's Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, which are 2 constellations. And they actually are kind of shaped like this. And here's the other one, you might say. Ursa Minor, known as the little bear, the star here at the very end of it is the, I'm thinking of it right, that's the North Star, right? And the way this works is that you can line up Ursa Major, it's wrong, it should be down here, it points at the North Star. They're called Big Dipper and Little Dipper, as I understand it, because the pioneers coming across America, when they would look up, they were so easily recognizable, and it looked like a ladle, looked like a dipper. So because they didn't know astronomy so well, or didn't worry about what the constellations really were, they just said, well, there's the Big Dipper and there's the Little Dipper. But I understand in reading about these constellations that they were actually represented a sheepfold. And so there's actually 4 main stars, and then 3 stars coming out. And you could say, well, if this is a sheepfold, then here are the sheep either leaving or coming back to the sheepfold. If you have 2 sheepfolds where the sheep were kicked out, and here's the other sheepfold, and those sheep were kicked out, which is known as the Great Dispersion, or the diaspora, or the northern kingdom getting kicked out of their land and scattered across the face of the earth, and the southern kingdom of Yehuda getting kicked out of their land and scattered over the face of the earth, then the great event of the Scriptures is the coming back together of the tribes to the kingdom. The united kingdom is the main, you might say, goal set out in the future. Now, from a Christian point of view, for 50 years, I never heard about this. It wasn't even an issue. Never talked about it. Monty Judah brought it up, and he calls it the Greater Exodus. It's like, Greater Exodus? The only Greater Exodus I ever learned about was the rapture. This is not the same as the rapture event. Yahweh says that the Greater Exodus, this Exodus that's coming, will be so big that people will stop even referring to the Exodus where they came out of Egypt with Moshe leading them, and then they go to Mount Sinai and they receive the 10 Commandments. But this one is going to be so big, such a climactic event. He's going to regather his people where he scattered them all across the face of the earth and bring his people back to the land that he promised our forefathers. Generally, that refers to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the patriarchs of the 12 tribes. He promised them that though their descendants get scattered for not following the Torah, he would bring them back. So the idea here is that in looking forward to that event, if you're simply writing a graphic image of a picket fence, you're seeing an image of a fence. But if you say, here's one sheepfold, and then here's the other sheepfold, and they're both held together by a vav, a nail. That's the het. And who's that vav nail? Well, the man that was nailed, Yeshua, HaMashiach, that's who that is. So the one that secures the 2 houses coming back together, the kingdom reunited, is a statement embedded in the picture of that het drawn this way, which is why I use that image. Ties to the constellations, which means, well, wait a minute, if the Big and Little Dipper, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, have something to do with a prophetic telling of the dispersion and regathering of the tribe, that kind of opens up this whole other issue of discussing the rest of the constellations to see what's in them. That's a subject for another occasion. But it's a very interesting thing because there's something in every one of the constellations. What we have inherited is that each one of the constellations is a picture of a Greek deity and a story about a Greek Titan. But the story, remember the word Shem, translated name, also means fame, renown, reputation, or what you're all about. So to tell the story of a foreign mighty one, a foreign deity, is actually talking about his Shem. And there's a place where Yahweh says, don't even let the Shem, the name of other deities, come out of your mouth. Don't let it be heard on your mouth even talking about these foreign deities. Well, unfortunately, it kind of sets up a problem because there's some great movies out, like Thor's out now. And oh, wait a minute, I just spoke his name. That's the mention of a Greek mighty one. Now, some might say, did I just commit a sin? Did I just break that commandment? Well, that's a matter for, again, other discussion. But the fact of the matter is, when Yahweh says, don't even allow the name, the Shem, the reputation, the stories of these foreign mighty ones to be on your mouth, was he referring to going to movies? Was he talking about celebrating their holy days, their festival days? Ishtar, after all, where we get Easter, same word, is the name of Ashtart, which was the goddess of fertility that he hated. The Baals and Ashtart were the two types of deities that Yahweh criticized Israel for recognizing, for looking to, for baking cakes to the Queen of Heaven having to do with Ashtart. And of course, their names are written in the scriptures. So is Dagon, the fish god of the Philistines, is also mentioned. You can't read scripture and not mention these guys' names. But the point, so is Molech and Chemosh. And anyway, the point is that they'd sacrifice their children to these. So you read scriptures, you're mentioning them, you're realizing that they did certain things. But when Yahweh says, do not entertain their stuff, their remembrance, how do we do that? You see, this isn't a matter of legalism. This is a matter of Yahweh's desire. So we talked one other day about the word desire a couple weeks ago. It's the word chet, pe, zadi, chafat. And the interesting thing about this word desire, that's why we're studying this alphabet, to find out what Yahweh's desire is so that we can fulfill his desire. When Brad Scott studies the language, he said something interesting. He said the center is kind of like the heart of the word, and the outer two is basically like the body, or it's clothed. Well, the interesting thing about chafat is that if you take the outer two letters, chet zadi, that's the word that literally means arrow. So we think, oh, arrow, that's something that you shoot, but it's also, it means to bisect something or cut it in half. And it doesn't necessarily mean half, though it's translated as half. It also means to bisect. So again, if we study this language, we realize there's these concepts around the words. It's not like chatz, well, that's arrow, or chatz, oh, that means half. If you read the scriptures, it'll tell you that this means 6 months. 6 months, well, that's half a year. Well, you read in Daniel, it says time times and half a time means 1 year, 2 year, and a half a year. These are all, people construe that, but that's not what it says. That word is literally arrow, or something which cuts something and opens it up. Pe zadi, as a word, again, you can look in the dictionary and see this. It basically means a mouth that opens. So when you have a zadi after that word pe is a mouth, literally, and zadi is something that sprouts or opens up like a flower that opens up, or a bird that opens up its wings, or a butterfly that opens up its wings. So there's this concept of this mouth opening. Something that can open that wasn't opened is now opening. So if you can, and then you look at this word, pe, happens to mean clean and pure, but it's also the tooth of a key. And again, that's in the Red Dictionary. You just look at those words. And so to look at this word for desire and say, what if you put all that together? So if this is the opening of a mouth, well, pe is a mouth, but a mouth is the thing that opens. The big white fence had an opening, one opening. We'll get into this in a second, but it was the three-colored embroidered door, and that's the opening of the chet, the fence. So the opening of a it could be anything, but in this case it's the mouth, because the pei, here's the mouth, but the pei is something that opens. And if this is clean and pure, and also the tooth of a key, then you put all this together and say, well, this word here that simply is translated as desire. And again, we're going off the premise that Yahweh designed this language. So if he said, Israel's job is to fulfill Yahweh's desire. Israel was chosen because it was Yahweh's desire. He created the universe and the heavens, the earth, the fish and the birds and everything in it because it was his desire. So for us to say, well, are we just supposed to just rattle around here like marble in a can that you shake for a while until you get tired of playing it and then say, well, I guess our life is over? Or should we, can we determine what Yahweh's desire is and accomplish it, fulfill it, make him happy that we're walking the face of the earth for a few years? I mean, you read the scriptures and he's pretty ticked off about some of the people that were wandering the face of the earth. Can we make him actually happy that we're here? What's his desire? If the pei, the mouth, is at the heart, you could say, what did he say? He told us by his mouth. He told us what was at his heart. Look in the Ten Commandments, Mount Sinai. Read what Yeshua said. But then you have to say, okay, well, you see his heart is wrapped up with an arrow around it. An arrow is something which pierces. An arrow is something which is an attack weapon. His heart is protected, guarded. Well, that's like the picture of the Mishkan again, the big white fence. If you see a fence guards and protects, it also imprisons. But the concept of the het is that it's an enclosure that you can't see what's on the other side. The big white fence was, depending on how you reckon, had a certain number of cubits. I think it was like 9 feet tall, if I'm not mistaken. So you can't just look over the fence and see what was going on inside. If his heart is protected by something which cuts, that's armament, that's military. And yet his desire is that a pure, clean mouth, like the tooth of a key, will open the door. I mean, again, part of the use of the dictionary that we were talking about last week is to say, how do you use the dictionary to translate these words? So I'm not trying to sit here and say, oh, I have a better translation, here, just read this, as compared to here, read King James or NIV or so. But the purpose of this class here is to observe how the language works so that you can use the dictionary, and if anything I've done is of any benefit, like the chart it was here, it's moved. It's just simply a matter of saying, this is what the letters mean, and if we look at what the letters mean, this right here, then it'll help you in terms of looking at a word like hafat and saying, what does that tell me? There's a fence and a mouth and a fish hook. Well, gee, if you have a fish hook in your mouth, you can capture the fish and throw them in your boat. I mean, you can go there with it. But see, the purpose of this is to say, I can't tell you exactly what this means. I can help point you to the pictures and say, you have to sit there and think about it and ponder it, pray about it, meditate, and say, what about his desire? So for me to say, okay, I can show you individual, here's a fence, here's a mouth, and here's a... It's not just a fish hook, it's a sprout. You see a piece of metal with a sprout coming off the side. It is a fish hook. But what does a fish hook do? It catches you. What catches you? Your desires. So your desires catch you. So you could say that Zadi also represents something about desire. Well, it happens to be used in the word desire. So satisfying your mouth is also a place of desire. So here you have a picture of what goes in your mouth, what comes out of your mouth is an expression of desire. There's a number of things wrapped up into this word, which you have to literally sit and think and look at other words that are spelled with het pei, other words that are spelled with pei zadi. So the picture of the Mishkan. The key to this whole alphabet seems to be the Mishkan itself. So if one was to look at the alphabet, and we discussed this before, if you look at Frank Seekon's work or even Jeff Benner's, the back of Lou White's book, Fossilized Customs, you'll have a list of the basic meanings of the words. And if you look at this chart, if you read right across where it says basic object, a bet is an object. So all the way across the top you read it, and it tells you the basic object of each letter. Aleph is an ox, basic object. Bet is a house. Gimel is a camel. Dalet is a door. Now you can infer other things about those, but as a basic object, that's what the letters mean. Hey is a window, Vav is a nail, Zion is a weapon, Het is a fence. You could sit there and look at that and say, okay, now I know something about the alphabet. The letters mean something. Now the word Aleph, actually, you're looking up in the dictionary, you'll see the word Aleph actually is an ox. It also means 1,000. It's also something strong like an ox, but now we're getting into other concepts. But the basic objects is just ox. And it's drawn like the head of an ox. The word bet means house. The word gimel means camel. The word dalet literally means something hanging. A door hangs on hinges. The letter hey means the. It's pointing to. Like a window. You open up a window so you can see. So there's these concepts embedded in each one of the words. But if somebody went through and said, okay, so tet means fence. Tet, they'll say, means a basket. But if you look closer, it's a full basket, which means complete. It's like the concept of 100% or 360 degrees all the way around. It's like when the hands on the clock go all the way around one full circle. That's the full basket concept. So it's drawn like a round circle with an X in the middle. It's like, well, what does an X mean? Well, the X is the sign of the letter Tav, which means a complete or full. It's the last letter of the alphabet. So if you have a Tav inside of a circle, that's a picture of fully 360 degrees filled up. It's a picture of a full basket. It means other things too, but I'm trying to show you that there are these basic ideas. What does that got to do with the Mishkan? If all you're doing is looking at the letters and what they mean, people have done this for centuries. Everybody knows these things. It's common knowledge. It's common knowledge that Aleph is an ox, Bet is a house, Gimel is a camel, Dalet's a door, Hey is a window. Everybody knows this. Any book you get on the alphabet, they will tell you this. This letter Het suddenly changes everything. What I noticed, and why I'm the guy up here talking about this, is that the Mishkan itself was something that Yahweh told Moshe to build according to the pattern. And I mentioned once before, last week I think it was, that there was a correction to be made on this chart. And because it's up here, I'll show you right where it is. Right here in the middle, it says the word, on the right-hand side in the gray, it says the word pattern. It's spelled wrong. In Paleo, it's supposed to be the first letter and the last letter are Tavs, and the word in between is Bet Nun Yod, Tabenit. I have the last two letters reversed. So anybody hearing this, that has to be changed. The last two letters of the word Tabenit. The interesting thing about that word is the word Beni literally means my son, or it's also translated my children. So here you have the letter Tav is a mark or a sign, or technically the sign of the covenant. So here you have the word for pattern or form is my son wrapped in the covenant. Now you can say, well, if Yahweh invented this language, then whose son is he talking about? He's either talking about Israel, because he said Israel is my firstborn. When he sent Moshe to Pharaoh, he said, Israel is my firstborn son. You let my son go, or I'm going to kill your firstborn son. And Pharaoh said, huh? Who's Yahweh that I should regard him? Like, okay, you want to play that game? You'll find out. 10 plagues later, he finally let Israel go. Who is this son wrapped in the covenant? From the New Testament model, it's like, well, that's Yeshua. From the Old Testament model, it's Israel. But if you look even closer, I believe it's in Jeremiah, it says it's Ephraim, the northern kingdom, or this one youngest son of Joseph, who was the 11th son of Jacob. How's he Yahweh's firstborn son? There's these concepts that are playing around. They're not locked in exactly the way we like to picture them locked in. There's concepts. In Hebrew, it's pictures, it's forms. It's like this the nucleus with a swarm of electrons around it. That's what I'm trying to get across here. Nevertheless, the word for pattern is my son wrapped in the covenant. So the pattern of the Mishkan, I'm construing to say the pattern of the Mishkan, you'll see his son, Yahweh's son, wrapped in the covenant. Okay, so you look at the Mishkan pattern, and you won't see the word Mishkan pattern with a phrase listed out. But it's something that I noticed one day, and that's the premise of this whole talk. If you look at the 7 days of creation, there's a pattern. The first day, he said, "Let there be light." The second day, he separated. Well, of course, if you look close, he separated every single day. Every day there was a separation. But on day 2, it was water from water. And then day 3, it was taking the waters under the earth and bringing forth land, and then speaking plant life into the land. You might say seeds. He spoke seeds. Was that the concept of life that didn't exist before? Day 4 was the sun, moon, and the stars. Day 5 was the fish and the birds. Day 6 was the man and animals. And day 7 is Shabbat. Okay, that's the sequence of the 7 days. And if you read that and you study that and you go, okay, there was 6 days. Arbitrary stuff he made. He could have switched them around anyway. And if you think logically, it's like, well, okay, maybe they make sense, but they seem to be a pretty random assortment of what he did. Now, the creator of heaven and earth determined these 7 steps before there was ever a man, before there was ever a language, before there was anybody to think or ponder or assess or determine or react to anything he said and did. Therefore, this 7-step sequence is Yahweh's personal, chosen agenda, design, orchestrated sequence. He designed it before anybody else was around to make a comment about it. Now, when he told Moshe on Mount Sinai, make the Mishkan, and again we talked about the word Mishkan, it's translated tabernacle, but it's the word mem, shin, kaf, nun, and shekan, where we get the word Shekinah, which is to say neighboring. Mem is a place, so it's the place where he neighbors. The word shack here is like this, where you get the same English out of that. But anyway, it's the neighboring place. The Mishkan is the place where Yahweh has chosen to neighbor with us, his presence with us. He said, make the Mishkan on earth just like the one I showed you, the pattern in heaven. Now that means, when did he make the one in heaven, in the heavenly realm? When did he determine that pattern? If you read in Genesis 1, the 7 days of creation, then you get to Genesis 2 and it says, so everything in heaven and earth was completed, and all its array. Means all the details, everything else. When did the Mishkan pattern get made in heaven? Was it that first week? Was it before the first week? Or was it like 2,000 years later that Yahweh says, oh, there's one more thing I got to make. I got to make this Mishkan in heaven to show Moshe the pattern. Here it is, 1500 BC. That's when Moshe was around, 1500 BC. It's like, did Yahweh just make it? No, it says in Genesis chapter 2 that heaven and earth were completed in all their array. That means the Mishkan pattern in heaven must have been made either the first week or before the first week, but not 1500 BC. So Moshe did not invent the tabernacle. Moses did not invent the design of the Mishkan. It came from before. Well, how does the design of the Mishkan fit this pattern? Day one, he said, let there be light. Well, the basic Mishkan pattern is a big white linen fence. So hence this outfit, a big white fence. 9 feet tall, something like, I think, was it 50 feet, 75 feet wide, I guess it was, 150 feet deep. A big white linen fence. So here's the big white fence. Now on that fence, it was pure white linen, and the scriptures, the book of Exodus talks about it. You can see it had certain poles and stakes and types of metal, but it had one door, and that had an embroidered door. I believe that was about 50 feet wide, and it said it was blue, purple, and red embroidery. So here this breastplate, this is like a Native American bone breastplate, on the big white linen fence, blue, purple, and red on white linen with gold thread. So because we're supposed to have blue tzitzit, so here's like blue threads with gold and silver, and these are the colors used on the embroidery of the big white fence. This was how you get in. Now I maintain, in thinking about the colors blue, purple, red with white linen, could it mean something? You've got a sapphire brick pave work that Moshe saw when he and the 70 elders went and beheld Yahweh on Mount Sinai. Well, sapphire is generally regarded as blue, and you're supposed to have a blue tzitzit thread to remember that he's the creator, so blue kind of speaks of the creator. The creator's throne room floor, and the blue tzitzit, to remember he's the creator. So the yod, which is the hand that says it's the working artist, the little letter yod, seems like it should be blue. So blue for the creator. Purple is like royal decrees. It's the color of royalty. So if purple means the royal decrees of the creator, then the hay would be essentially the equivalent of the Torah. The Torah instructed to Israel was the royal decrees of the creator given to his people. So the second letter hay in purple, so if this is blue and purple lining up with the hay, which is the expression of Yod, the creator, is equal to the Torah. And this is the creator, the Yod. And then you have a Vav. Well, a Vav is a nail or a hook or, like we said, a man, the one who connects heaven to earth. And the next letter is red. Well, who is the red? The word Adam is red. Man is red. Red blood. Adam. Red earth. The Mashiach sent from the Creator to the earth for our regard, for our sake, to bridge this gap with us. Do we write the word Messiah here? The three ways that Yahweh the Creator communicated with us was in His creation, it's colored blue, in His Torah, equivalent of the color purple, through the Mashiach, the sent one, that's like the color red, and then what about the white linen? Well, all through the scriptures, white linen refers to the righteous works of the... Well, saints is a New Testament word. It would be kadoshim, which would be the set-apart ones, according to an Old Testament term. Kadosh, remember, to go back to recognizing spelling, is kuf, dalet, shin. And the priests had on their headband kadosh la Yahweh, which would be set apart unto Yahweh. It's translated as the word holy, but as we mentioned before, the soundbite, the phonetic sound, holy, was the name of a goddess from India. So to use the word kadosh is pure Hebrew, which is what Yahweh spoke. He didn't say the word holy, he said the word kadosh. So to say the word kadosh instead of holy is to try to conform our minds to his chafetz, his desire. That's why we're trying to learn Hebrew stuff, is to so we could get the permutations, the morphs, the twisting, the convolutions of all the other languages that English has assimilated, and get them out of our minds and bring our minds back to his pure language. Remember, it's the clean and pure, which is the tooth of the key to open the door. That's what this is about. How do we clean up our minds to have the key work? That's why we're doing this. It's not to disparage anybody's native language or not to criticize anybody's doctrine or step on anybody's toes in terms of which days they like to celebrate or things that they believe that they feel comfortable and good about. This is about cleaning up what we've inherited in order to come back to fulfilling Yahweh's desire and cleaning up the teeth off the key so that the key will work if we try to use it. That's what this is about.
Amen.
For the Kodashim, for the ones that are called to his kingdom to do what he said, is the definition of righteousness. Righteousness is not me choosing a list of, I think I would like to do this and not do that. Or I'm going to do these things and call it good, and those things I'm going to call bad. And if you conform to my list, then I'm going to call you good. And if you don't, then I'm going to call you evil. This has nothing to do with my list. The word righteousness finds one definition: conformity to Yahweh's personal standard. That's all righteousness is. It happens that it's very good and it doesn't harm anybody. But you could say, well, wait a minute, the Israelites were told righteously to go slaughter the inhabitants of the Canaanites that were in the land. That's a whole other matter. The point is, to do what Yahweh said is the definition of righteousness. So the righteousness of the saints, the Kadoshim, the Talmudim, the taught ones, the disciples, all the same word, those people doing what Yahweh said according to his expressed desire is righteousness, which is typified by the picture of white linen all through the Scriptures, Old Testament and New Testament. So the second Hey of Yod He Vav He, which is the expression of what the Vav said to do. Remember, the Yod expressed himself in the Hey. The Torah made incarnate is the Vav Man Mashiach, the Word made flesh. Yeshua himself, we believe, is the Torah itself made perfect expression in human flesh, human form. The Torah, the Word made flesh. Everything that the Torah said was done and expressed, and he said, see, I did it, you can do it too. Oh, wait a minute, no, we were told that he said, no, I did it because you can't. No, that's what we were told he said. I believe what he said was, I told you guys to do this, now I'm doing it, and said, follow me, do as I do. Even Paul said, follow me as I follow the Mashiach, as I walk in his ways. I'm showing you that he did it, and I think it's easy too. I'm suggesting that we should be doing what he said to do. That's what this is about. What did he say? Let's do it. Let's walk in his ways, and we will be clothed in white linen, robes of righteousness, just as he was. So when you see one clothed in white linen above the waters of the river, Daniel 12, oh, that's the one clothed in white linen. Only he could deserve to be clothed in white linen. We are all bequeathed, you might say, purity as unto him, but yet our effort, our intention, our desire conforming to his desire is to walk as he walked, not to find excuses or convenient, complacent, ideological spins and twists and loopholes to get around it. This isn't about that. This is about, what did he say? Let's do what he said. So Yod He Vav He, if this is white linen, the second He, Yeshua even said, I'm leaving, but I'm going to send you the Ruach HaKodesh, who will lead you in the truth. The truth is what? The truth is the Torah. That's why the second He looks like the first He. Because the first He being Torah, the Ruach, the second He, is not going to lead us into anything other than what the Torah said. So the Ruach must look exactly like the Torah, because Yeshua himself looked exactly like the Torah. So you have a picture of a hay, a vav with a hay here and a hay here, a vav with a hay here and a hay here, is a picture of Yeshua with like these two wings almost, as it were, light blasting out here, like hay can mean like light irradiating, or it's like look, behold, it's like pointing the way, and this is the Torah. So Yeshua on the one hand, on the other hand is the Ruach, and the two are the identical letters. And if you look what the word He Vav He means in the Scriptures, it talks about to exist. To exist. Being. Reality. And as I said last week, you can take, anytime you have a Vav and a Yod, they're almost you can replace them, you can shuffle them around, they're almost like wild cards. Every word that has to do with a Yod, He, and a Vav has to do with being and existence and reality. So if you want to know reality, if you want to exist, Yod He Vav He. You go back to what he said. Do what he said to do. An interesting thing, the Romans used to have a trick. They take a dead man, a carcass, and tie him to somebody else. I guess they chain him hand and foot. And so you'd have this dead man strapped to your back. You couldn't get rid of him. You're a prisoner in the dungeon. You've got this decaying carcass on your back, and it would rot. And the bugs and the rats would come and eat it. And you'd be wearing this guy. You'd be wearing this dead man. How do you get loose of him? Only until he rots and finally falls off and slips through the manacles, maybe. But it's like, how do you get rid of the dead man? There's one way to get rid of the dead man that we have picked up as we walk through life. And that's to turn to the big white fence of Yod He Vav He. Turn to his stuff. The big white fence out in the middle of the wilderness. It was darkness. It was out in the desert. I mean, it was pasture land. It wasn't necessarily a barren desert like it is now, because the Romans actually salted the place and kept everything from growing. The word wilderness literally had to do with the place where the cattle are driven to pasture. Interestingly enough, the word wilderness is bamidbar, and midbar actually, or debir, is the word for language. So you might say they were sent to the wilderness, but there's a place, it's also about language. That's a whole other tangent, but my point is to study language and study the word for wilderness, and we think, oh, that's a desert, that's a dry place. No, it's a place where you go to eat. You go to eat at the place of language as Yahweh's design. There's something about studying his words which is his stuff. We're not saying, oh, well, to study Yahweh is this one thing where you just be filled with the Spirit and you pray for people and you have a wonderful life. No, studying his word, feeding on his pasture land by his language is exactly what this is about. One of the little things on the picture of the Mishkan here, in the big white fence, there's green inside. Why is that? It wasn't arbitrary. It's because inside this het, like I said, it's where the two sheepfolds come together. It's kind of like this is the good pasture where the green grass is. Inside Yahweh's fenced area is the place we want to go to find. Look at Psalm 23. You could say, well, yeah, he leads me beside the still waters, and there's all these other concepts, but if we have the concept that the place we want to come back to, the place we want to come back to eat, the place we want to find our rest is in Yahweh's pasture with the combined tribes, is inside Yahweh's het. This is all what the het represents. So the big white fence lines up with light. Separating water from water has to do with, and I won't go into these because these are later on in the next 12 weeks. The altar of sacrifice, like a barbecue grill, separation. The next place is the laver, day 3. Sun, moon, and stars has to do with the menorah. The fish and the birds has to do with the ayin, which is the table of showbread. Day 6 has to do with the altar of incense, and then Shabbat has to do with the Ark of the Covenant. Just so you see how the pattern lines up. The fact is, each piece of the tabernacle fits the same pattern as the 7 days. And as we were saying, if Yahweh designed the Mishkan pattern, and he designed the 7 days before there was ever a man to make up a doctrine, then these are not man's doctrines. This is not Christianity, this is not Judaism, this is not ancient culture, this is not Phoenician studies. This is Yahweh's pattern that we're trying to recognize. And then you go to Leviticus 23, and he talks about Yahweh's festivals. Well, from an American Christian 20th century frame of mind, it's like, oh yeah, those are the Jews' holidays. Boy, those guys are always taking off work. They got all these holidays. It's like, Yahweh said, these are my festivals, which I'm giving to you, Israel, my son. I'm giving you my festivals. And being how that I just said, look, you're going to have a holiday today, and nobody would take it. So he says, okay, if he makes it a commandment, then we have to do the important things. So he made them commandments. You will take these days off. It's like, okay, we will take these days. Okay, now you're going to have a party. Oh. If it was up to me, for years I never took days off. Saturdays, Sundays, holidays, 4th of July, Memorial Day, I just worked and worked and worked and worked and worked. I can't say I got anywhere for it. I just worked a lot. But it's an interesting thing. If Yahweh said, I'm going to give you some very important things for you to regard. Sorry, we don't have time for that. Okay, I'm going to make it a commandment. Oh, now you got to regard it. Okay, now, because it's a commandment, now we will regard the important things. Why should we regard these things? To go back to the pattern here, Pesach, Passover, spelled with a CX, Pesach, it's a het, is like the light in the middle of the dark wilderness. In the middle of the darkness, if you have the pillar of fire glowing behind the big white fence, it's going to be like a big lampshade glowing in the middle of the camp. Pesach, they were in the middle of at least 100 years or so of slavery, of misery in Mitzrayim, Egypt. Pesach was like a breath of fresh air, a glass of cold water. It's like, finally, we're done with this. To come to the Mishkan big white fence in the middle of the grief of our culture, our religion, our government, our everything going on around us these days is like to go into the big white fence. Separate water from water, like the altar of sacrifice is Chag HaMatzot, the festival of unleavened bread, separating leavening from unleavening, his ways from not his ways. The third day, life, it's a time of gestation, counting 49. We're right now in the midst of the time of Shavuot, counting. If you count here for what this is worth, there's 49, and then there's 50, which is the 50th would be the Jubilee. The 50th would be like Pentecost, count 50 in Greek. So the reason I made this was because this is a picture of Shavuot. There's 7 sevens, different colors of threads here, silver and gold. 7 sevens you shall count for yourselves, and then the 50th is the 50th day after you've counted the 7 sevens. That's the day you take the break. You take the holiday. The year of the Jubilee, you give everything back that you borrowed and lent, and the land goes back to the original owners. It's a way of recalibrating your entire society. We haven't done it, and look at the mess we're in. If we go back to Yahweh's ways, I would think there's a way to solve the problem here. But the point is, life has to do with a gestation, counting 49s like pregnancy. Sun, moon, and stars, the menorah lines up with Yom Teruah, blowing of trumpets. As we said before, trumpets are filled with air to produce the fruit of sound. The menorah is filled with oil to produce the fruit of light. I'm showing you the comparison, how they line up, just to get a picture. And the psalmic looks pretty similar to the menorah. And as a matter of fact, one guy was saying how the original menorah was maybe a square-shaped thing instead of a rounded-shaped thing, pretty close to a psalmic picture. Yom Kippur, Judgment Day, weighing of scales. The letter that lines up with happens to be the ayin, which is to look and behold and evaluate and consider, which all has to do with Yom Kippur, like scales and balancing, fish in the sea, birds in the air, kind of a picture of heaven and hell, what you have to look forward to, depending on how the scales tip. Sukkot, men and animals were made day 6. Fellowship, talking, communication, eating, dancing, singing, prayer. Prayers of the saints are like it talks about the Kodashim is the incense going up before Yahweh. And then Shabbat, lining up with Shemini Atzeret, day 7, the one day everybody likes to forget. They think it's part of Sukkot, which it's not. It's the 8th day. Shemini means 8. There again, a picture of eternity outside the envelope of the 7 days of Sukkot. Of the first 6 festivals, here's the 7th festival, but it's called the 8th day, and 8th, like the new beginning, is kind of like an Aleph, but the last day is kind of like a Tav. So here you have this mysterious Aleph Tav wrapped up in Shemini Atzeret. And the other interesting thing, in the Kadosh Kodashim, which is called the Holy of Holies, the place where the Ark of the Covenant sat, it was also called the Debir, which is the Word. So here you have this mystery wrapped up in these images of these things. But the point of saying all this is the Mishkan pattern. But it's not just the objects, what it represents. And this is the basic meaning, I believe, of the entire Scripture is embedded right here in the Mishkan pattern. So you could say, take all 66 books, Old Testament, New Testament, the Torah, the Nevi'im, the prophets, the Keterim, the writings, so you got Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Keterim, Tanakh. You got the Gospels, you got the epistles. What's it all about? Big white fence in the darkness. Put before you, Moshe, he said, life and death, blessing and cursing, and I urge you to choose life. That's the big white fence. That's the beginning of the Mishkan pattern. Life and death, black and white. Take your pick. Life or death, blessing or cursing, you pick. Forget heaven or hell. Forget your sins being paid for. Forget anything else. Forget whether this and that about all the different doctrines and theologies. You choose life or death. That's the big white fence. Once you've made that decision, how do you get life? You come to the four-colored door, blue, purple, red, with white linen. And it stands for Yod He Vav He. There's one door in the kingdom, Yod He Vav He. Regardless of any other doctrines, it's Yod He Vav He. He is the guy who created this place. He's the guy that gave us the Torah. He's the guy that sent the Mashiach to us to show us that we could do it, to follow him and follow him in the ways of righteousness. That's Yod He Vav He. That's who he is. That is the one door to come in. The one door to come in the Mishkan is the blue, purple, red of the white linen. If you want to pervert his ways of righteousness, you ain't entered. You may think you got in, but if you pervert his ways and are not doing the ways of righteousness, you're not in. And if you did sneak in, Yeshua gave a parable about the guy that came to the party, and he was in there, and the host of the party came up and said, "Friend, how did you get in here? You don't have the garments on of the party guests." "Oh, well, And he called for the guards, and they grabbed him, and he said, "Bind him hand and foot, and throw him out in the gutter, and lock the door." You do not get in if you don't want to keep his ways in spite of what we've been told. You come into the kingdom, you learn his ways. He gave us some promises, blessing and cursing for what we did regarding his ways. That's what this is all about. And then he gave positions like branches on the menorah, establishing principalities like the sun, moon, and the stars, the constellations, for those who have learned his ways and believed his promises regarding the blessing and the cursing. And then he talks about Judgment Day and the evaluating of how we have done regarding keeping his charge. And then he says, let me explain it to you. Let me walk you through and process this whole thing. That's this position here, which lines up with the pay, the mouth, as he explains it. And then the hope set before us, which is like the picture of the Ark of the Covenant, is the end of the whole matter. That's the Mishkan pattern. Choose life, learn his ways, believe his promises. Yeshua said, I'm the vine, you're the branches. Stay attached to me. Stay attached to me, you can do everything. Without me, you can do nothing. Stay attached to him. Consider that what you do is going to come back. What goes around comes around. The day of Yom Kippur, the evaluation, the scales, the Vav that we talked about. He'll explain it. Go through it again. And the hope set before us. That's the Mishkan pattern. Every single thing in the Scriptures is based on this, and this is the premise of the entire Aleph Bet. Time for a break.